For years, this woman was seen as probably the unluckiest mother ever. Between 1972 and 1985, she lost 9 of her children. Doctors called it SIDS. Neighbors blamed genetics. One theory even suggested that she unknowingly passed along some rare, fatal gene inside her DNA. But decades later, forensic psychologists offered a different explanation, and the truth was a lot more disturbing. This is a story of Mary Beth Tinning. Hi everyone, I'm Rae Review, and I tell a lot of dark true crime stories on this channel. So viewer discretion is advised, but if you like spoken true crime stories, consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Either way, thank you so much for being here. So without further ado, let's dive into our story about Mary Beth Tinning. Mary Beth Rowe was born in 1942 in Duanesburg, a small town in upstate New York. She was raised in the post-war quiet of white picket fences and unspoken emotions. A true boomer indeed. A time when mothers didn't say I love you, and fathers expressed affection through discipline and not tenderness. Her father, by her own account, was strict and emotionally distant. Her father told her that her birth had been an accident. When she misbehaved, she would be locked in closets. Sometimes she'd get hit with a fly swatter. But, there were no bruises on her. There was no CPS reports. Just kind of emotional coldness that never thawed. She even reports that several times as a child she tried to take her own life. Side note, psychologists have actually looked back at her early life and her pattern of behavior with curiosity. Many experts see her childhood as the building blocks of a deep and untreated attachment disorder. So if I had to describe Mary Beth in a couple of words, I would say that she is white bread, kind of unremarkable. She tended to blend in pretty well with the crowd. In 1963, she met a man named Joseph Tinning on a blind date. And in 1965, they got married, and she became Mary Beth Tinning. He was a quiet, routine man, the kind of man who really didn't ask any questions and was very much of the mindset, a happy wife, a happy life. He worked at General Electric, and she stayed home and kept the house and, was ready to have children and start a family with him. To the outside world, they were, picture of perfection. Others suggest that, like a possible personality pathology, someone whose emotional development kind of stalled early, and it kind of left her desperate for control, validation, and attention, and emotional centrality. Having said that brings us to 1971. Mary Beth Tinning has settled into the role of a mother, a wife, and a neighbor. She volunteered with the ambulance corps, she helped at church events, she smiled politely at other moms at the grocery store. Her and her husband, Joseph, had 2 children, and she was pregnant with their 3rd child. Then something terrible happened. On December 26th, 1971, Mary Beth Tinning gave birth to her 3rd child, Jennifer, but she was incredibly sick. She was born with meningitis, and as a result, she had developed several brain abscesses, just as a newborn, and tragically, their baby never left the hospital. The loss of a child is inconceivable. I have 2 children, and I can tell you that it feels like your heart is walking on the outside of your body. The thought of losing a child is something that you don't really want to put words to because it feels like a violation against nature. However, I will tell you, the first words that came up when I Googled, parents describing how losing a child feels, the words that came up were catastrophic trauma. People experience profound grief and can go through an identity crisis, and it can affect every area of their life. That was the case with Mary Beth Tinning. She just lost her newborn daughter, and naturally the community rallied around her. The nurses at the hospitals were sobbing. She got tons of casserole, and people looked at her with pity and admiration that she was able to keep her head up. Here's a mother putting on a brave face for her family in light of the horrible tragedy that had befallen her innocent newborn baby girl. And then another terrible thing happened. Just 3 weeks after their newborn baby, Jennifer, had passed away, their 2-year-old son, Joseph Jr., was rushed to the emergency room. Mary Beth said that he had suffered a sudden episode at home and like some sort of seizure, which he'd never had before. He died hours later, and no autopsy was performed. The hospital just let it go. And then another terrible thing happened. Mary Beth's daughter, Barbara, who was 4 years old at the time, Mary Beth said that she had started having an episode also, like convulsions, and she just never woke up. The doctors suspected either cardiac arrest or a rare, little understood condition known as Rae syndrome, but it was never proven. It was vague blanket diagnoses and convenient. So, I mean, this is unimaginable that parents have lost 3 children due to natural causes in the span of a year. People actually started to think that this family was cursed, or that there could have been a gas leak in the house. All 3 of their deaths came at a surprise to everybody, because these were all healthy, active children beforehand. All the while, the community is surrounding Mary Beth with love. The community closed ranks around her, as small towns often do. She was perceived as a symbol of endurance and quiet strength in the face of adversity, never suspected of any foul play. So at the beginning of this video, I said that there were 9 children that Mary Beth buried. Over the course of 13 years, between 1972 and 1985, Mary Beth and her husband, Joseph Tinning, buried 9 children. All of the Tinning children never made it past toddlerhood, and most died as infants. And each time, the cause was elusive and vague. So let's walk through what happened to each of the kids, and I'm just going to go chronologically. And let me be clear, this is not for shock. This is just so that we can all understand the pattern that everybody missed. So, as we mentioned, Jennifer was the first. She was 8 days old. This was in 1972. She was born with meningitis, passed away of natural causes, fully acknowledged. Then 1972 was Joseph Jr., who was 2 years old. Mary Beth said he had a seizure and he passed away in the hospital. Also in 1972 was 4-year-old Barbara, who had mysterious convulsions and never woke up from her sleep. Then Mary Beth had her 4th child, Timothy, in 1973. So on December 10th, just 3 weeks after his birth, Timothy was brought back to the same hospital, and he was dead. Mary Beth Tinning told the doctors that she found him lifeless in his crib. Doctors didn't find anything medically wrong with him, so his death was officially attributed to SIDS, which is sudden infant death syndrome, which is a term that will be thrown around a lot discussing the children. Also, a couple things to know about SIDS. It is the sudden and unexplained death of an infant under 1 year old. A diagnosis of SIDS is made after all other possible causes of death have been ruled out after an investigation. Most SID deaths occur between 2 and 4 months of age, but can happen anytime within the first year of life. And it's kind of a blanket term if they can't find any specific cause of death. Having said that, this brings us to 1975 with Nathan, Mary Beth Tinning's 5th child. According to Mary Beth, she found him passed away while she was driving in the car with him. She pulled into the store parking lot, asked for help, but it was too late. His cause of death was fluid in the lungs, but there was no explanation for how or why that happened. Which brings us to 1978. 1978, Mary Beth and Joseph made arrangements to adopt a child. That same year, Mary Beth became pregnant with Mary Frances, their 6th child. The Tinnings did not cancel the adoption and chose to keep both children. In 1978, they received a baby boy, Michael, from the adoption agency. And 2 months later, on October 29th, she gave birth to her 6th child, Mary Frances. But in January of 1979, Mary Beth rushed Mary Frances to the emergency room. She told the doctors that Mary Frances had had a seizure. The staff were actually able to revive her, and it looked like she had escaped death. Thank goodness, because Mary Beth Tinning had been through enough. However, only a month later, Mary Beth came into the same hospital with Mary Frances. And this time, Mary Frances was brain dead. Mary Beth said that she found her baby unconscious in her crib, and she had no idea how it happened. Her death was listed as SIDS. Oh, and side note, I totally forgot to mention this. Just a few years prior, in 1974, her husband Joseph was also rushed to the hospital after falling seriously ill. Both he and doctors were shocked when they discovered that he had barbiturates in his system, but he didn't take barbiturates, so how could they possibly be there? When they told Mary Beth, they asked her, did you do this? You know what she said? Oh yeah, I did it. Like, openly admitted to poisoning her husband. The reason she gave? The marriage wasn't going well, she said, but her husband didn't leave her, he didn't press charges, there was no separation. Just business as usual. Now, I understand that marriage takes work and trust, but it is really concerning that Mary Beth's idea of resolving conflict is putting barbiturates into her husband's grape juice. That brings us to 1979, when Mary Beth had her 7th child, Jonathan. But just 3 months after he was born, she went to the same hospital because she found Jonathan unconscious. Like her child before him, Mary Frances, he was actually successfully revived by the doctors. And due to the family's history, Jonathan was sent to Boston Hospital, where he was examined thoroughly because they didn't want to take any chances with letting another child pass away like this. The doctors couldn't find a valid reason why the baby simply stopped breathing, so Jonathan was sent home. But only a few days later, Mary Beth returned to the hospital where Jonathan was brain dead, and he died just a few days later. So by now, 7 of her biological children are gone. But let's talk about her 8th child, Michael, which is the adopted child. He has no biological ties to her, so this realistically shouldn't happen to him because they're starting to suspect that Mary Beth has a rare gene that just causes her children to pass away unexpectedly. They're calling it like a mysterious death gene, but Michael is adopted, so this shouldn't affect him. He also had no health conditions, no history of family illness, so keep that in mind. On the morning of March of 1981, Mary Beth showed up at her pediatrician's office with Michael, her adopted child, who was then 2.5 years old. He was wrapped up in a blanket, and he was unconscious. She told the doctor that she wasn't able to wake Michael up, and she didn't know what was wrong. When the doctor opened up the blanket to examine Michael, he was already dead. Mary Beth said he fell down the stairs, and weeks later said that, he just didn't wake up. The autopsy said pneumonia. And the forensic pathologist later admitted that they're actually relieved to find anything that didn't mean foul play on Mary Beth Tinning's part. This should have been the moment that changed everything, because if this was a genetic issue, how could a child who was adopted also be affected by this? And we have all heard of bad luck, but this is unbelievable. With every loss, Mary Beth Tinning stood behind every single one of her children's coffins. She was a mother enveloped in grief. People said things like, God has given her more than anyone should bear. She has got to be the unluckiest person on the planet, and she has been cursed with a death gene that she is passing on to her children. Friends, family, and doctors all urged Mary Beth Tinning not to have any more children, because despite doctors' best efforts, this just seemed to keep happening, and it seems like they aren't able to prevent her children from dying. But Mary Beth Tinning did not heed this advice, because she got pregnant again with her 9th child. And this is where everything started to unravel for her. It is now 1985. Mary Beth is now 42, and she gives birth to Tammy Lynn. So in December, Mary Beth and her neighbor Cynthia Walter, who is also a nurse, went shopping. They were hanging out and everything was business as usual. But later that night, Cynthia Walter received a frantic telephone call from Mary Beth Tinning. When Cynthia arrived, she found Tammy Lynn laying on her changing table. She testified that the child was not moving, and she couldn't feel a pulse, and the baby wasn't breathing. They rushed little Tammy Lynn to the emergency room, and when she got there, she was pronounced dead. But this time, something was different. The ER team, many of whom had seen Mary Beth Tinning multiple times over the years, felt it in their bones. Their spidey senses were tingling, and more than anything, it was a gnawing discomfort that they could no longer ignore. Her grief looked the same, but the pattern had changed, because this time, Tammy Lynn didn't die quietly like her siblings. This time, Tammy Lynn showed signs of a struggle. Forensic examiners noticed hemorrhaging behind Tammy Lynn's eyes. These were small, visible only under a microscope. It was a sign, they said, of gentle but intentional pressure. It was a type of suffocation that wouldn't have left bruises, but it left a trail. And this was not a death that was caused by a faulty gene in her DNA. This was a death that was caused by human hands. And then came the call. Just hours after Tammy Lynn's death, the police received an anonymous tip. The voice on the line was shaky, and they wouldn't say who they were, but they said what no one else would dare to. It said, "Check the mother. This has happened too many times." And that call seemed to shatter the veil of silence that had protected Mary Beth Tinning over the years. Mary Beth's community wouldn't dare accuse her of doing something this terrible to 9 of her children. However, the red flags were always there. For example, Mary Beth was always alone when each child stopped breathing. There were no witnesses, no home visits, no intervention. She kept having children despite medical suggestions to stop. So within hours of that phone call, the police were at the Tinning home, and they weren't delivering condolences, they were there collecting evidence. Law enforcement opened a quiet and calculated investigation. They combed through hospital records, they interviewed doctors, and for the first time, they actually started building a timeline of the deaths and placing them side by side. And the pattern was undeniable. Then the question came that no one could answer: why was nothing done sooner? It's also worth mentioning that when investigators learned that Mary Beth actually poisoned her husband back in the 70s with sleeping pills, that seemed much more relevant, that detail. It also shows that this is a person capable of inflicting grievous harm on a loved one, and that should have been the moment that should have changed everything and raised some red flags about Mary Beth Tinning's behavior. So when word spread that Mary Beth was being investigated, the community split. Some refused to believe it, thinking that she had been through enough and that this was cruel because she had lost 9 children. It was clear. If she admitted to 3, it's likely that the others weren't accidents either. They just didn't have the physical evidence to prove it. Still, even a partial confession is enough. Mary Beth Tinning, who was once seen as the unluckiest mother ever, was now a suspect in multiple child deaths, and she had put it in writing. So let's talk about Mary Beth Tinning's state of mind a little bit and try to understand the unthinkable. Psychologists, forensic psychiatrists, and criminologists have spent years studying Mary Beth Tinning. The truth is, Mary Beth is, by definition, a serial killer. So a serial killer, by definition, is a person who commits a series of murders, often with no apparent motive, and typically following a characteristic, predictable behavior pattern. When people hear the term serial killer, they usually picture something really dramatic and violent, and Mary Beth Tinning definitely doesn't fit that image. She looked like a quiet, polite mother who was devastated by the death of her 9 children. But that doesn't erase the fact that these children died as a result of her decisions and her actions. Intentional or not, she did what meets the definition of a serial killer. Multiple victims, a recurring pattern, and one central figure at the heart of it all. Having said that, experts also believe that Mary Beth may have suffered from a rare and very disturbing mental disorder that I have spoken on many times. You can check out my other videos on this disorder, but that is what's known as Munchausen by proxy syndrome, which is now referred to as factitious disorder imposed on another. For the sake of keeping it simple, I'm going to call it Munchausen by proxy, because that is the term that most people are familiar with. This disorder has been documented several times. This is when a caregiver, usually a parent, usually the mother, intentionally causes or fabricates illness in someone under their care, typically a child, and the goal isn't personal gain in a traditional sense. It's usually for attention that they do this, typically like the emotional reward of being perceived as a strong, nurturing caregiver who is, just suffering, and you receive all sorts of sympathy from people. Just a different form of energy vampire. Mary Beth's background fits into what many clinicians call a high-risk profile. There was early emotional negligence, she had low self-esteem, a history of control in caregiving roles, and a deep fear of abandonment or invisibility. And after her first child, Jennifer, died of a legitimate medical condition, Mary Beth was enveloped in community support. Neighbors brought her meals, nurses cried with her, friends, regarded her as an incredibly strong person. And some experts believe that that moment was formative. The loss was real, and the attention she received was very real too. And for someone whose identity had never really been validated, that feeling may have become addictive to her. So people with Munchausen by proxy often appear kind and cooperative with doctors. They're devoted to their child's care. They're the last person you'd ever suspect. And that's what makes this disorder so dangerous. It weaponizes the very role we trust the most, the loving parent. So Mary Beth's case is a little different because most Munchausen by proxy cases involve a long arc of non-lethal harm. You'll see that their children are in and out of hospitals. Children are, made to appear sick again and again, endless doctor visits, invasive tests, until someone catches on. But they don't typically pass away. It's just a really long history of medical hospitalizations. And then typically they'll move on to a different doctor and a whole different, team, and they'll repeat the cycle again. But Mary Beth Tinning's case was different because there were no second chances for any of her children. There were no repeated medical interventions, and each child passed in a really sudden, final way. And that's what makes her case blur the line between Munchausen by proxy and something a lot darker, into serial killer territory, a pattern of intentional serial harm that escalated to the fatal outcomes of 9 of her children. The police didn't need her to admit to all 9 deaths. They only needed one, and now they had it. With the forensic evidence from Tammy Lynn's autopsy and Mary Beth's confession in hand, they arrested her on second-degree murder charges. The headlines spread pretty fast. There were headlines like "Mother of 9 charged in infant death," "A decade of grief now under suspicion," and "From mourner to murderer." But even then, after the confession, there were people who didn't believe it. How could you? It's something unthinkable, because the truth is just way too horrifying and depraved to think that it could actually be possible. So in the summer of 1987, Mary Beth Tinning stood trial in Schenectady County. But surprisingly, it wasn't for her 9 children. It wasn't for the 3 children she had confessed to. It was just 1. The prosecution chose to focus solely on the death of her last child, Tammy Lynn. Why? Because it was the only one with hard forensic evidence. And they knew that a broader trial, one stretching across 14 years and 9 children, would risk confusing a jury or worse, evoke sympathy from the jury. They chose to focus their aim. 1 child, 1 moment, 1 final fatal act. The prosecution laid out a timeline of the tragedy, one that no longer looked like a coincidence, but choreography. Medical examiners testified that Tammy Lynn did not die of SIDS. Her injuries, though subtle, told a different story. Pinpoint hemorrhages behind her eyes show signs of asphyxia by soft obstruction and a lack of oxygen. In plain terms, someone had covered her face long enough to silence her and to suffocate her. And that someone was Mary Beth Tinning. The prosecution entered Mary Beth's written confession into evidence. She had signed it, and she described the act in chilling simplicity. "I put a pillow over her head until she stopped crying." The defense argued it had been coerced and that Mary Beth had been vulnerable, broken, and possibly manipulated by the police, and that she didn't understand what she was signing. She had been grieving too deeply to think clearly. But the prosecution reminded the jury Mary Beth wasn't questioned for hours without sleep. She wasn't under duress, and she had asked for the pen herself. The trial lasted 6 weeks. The evidence was emotional, but not overwhelming. There weren't any cameras. There were no bombshells, just a slow, clinical peeling back on a life built on loss. After 23 hours of deliberation, the jury returned guilty. Not of intentional murder, though. Guilty of second-degree murder, described legally as an act of depraved indifference to human life. Mary Beth didn't really show any visible sign of really anything. She didn't fight the verdict, she just seemed to accept it. In October of 1987, Mary Beth Tinning was sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. The judge acknowledged what everyone else was thinking in court. He said that this trial was about more than just 1 child. It was about a pattern of death that the system had failed to stop, a pattern no one had the courage or proof to name until it was too late. Outside the courtrooms, the reactions were divided. Some neighbors still couldn't believe it, that no mother could possibly do this and that she had been punished enough. But a lot of people, many others, really finally started to see the story for what it was. This was a woman, for reasons few can comprehend, made herself the center of her own tragedy again and again. After Mary Beth Tinning's conviction, New York and several other states began reviewing death protocols in hospitals, autopsy procedures, and interagency communication systems. Today, if 2 children die unexpectedly within the same household, it automatically triggers a multidisciplinary review, and that safeguard didn't exist back then. So where is Mary Beth Tinning now? After her sentencing in 1987, Mary Beth Tinning was sent to Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for Women, which is a maximum security prison in New York. She was 44 years old, and she would remain there for the next 31 years. She kept a low profile inside, took on jobs, she didn't have any disciplinary problems, but she also made no admissions of guilt. not for years. She became eligible for parole in 2007 after doing a minimum of 20 years of her sentence. But the parole board denied her 6 times. They cited her lack of accountability, her refusal to express any genuine remorse, and her continued insistence that she didn't remember anything, didn't understand, and she couldn't explain her behavior. The parole board said, how could you parole someone when they refused to admit what they did? It wasn't until 2011, during her 7th parole hearing, that something shifted. For the first time, Mary Beth Tinning said the words that the parole board wanted to hear. She said, and I quote, "After the deaths of my other children, I just lost it. I became a damaged, worthless piece of a person. And when my daughter was young, I believed she was going to die too, so I just did it." It wasn't an emotional confession, but it was the closest thing to an admission anyone had ever heard from her. So in July of 2018, Mary Beth Tinning was granted parole at the age of 75. She had served 31 years, and she left quietly. There were no cameras and no press. That's it. She was released under lifelong supervision, a condition tied to her sentence. She is also not allowed to care for children. Her movements are tracked, and her story is mostly forgotten. Like outside of rooms like this, where people are still trying to understand how this happened in the first place. And her husband, Joseph Tinning, the man who stood by her side and forgave her for poisoning him, he stood by her through every funeral. He sat in the courtroom and believed in her innocence, and reportedly remained by her side, at least up until her release. And no one knows for sure where she is today. I believe she's somewhere in New York, quiet and unassuming, and just another elderly woman in the grocery line. And that is the story of Mary Beth Tinning. This case isn't just about loss, and this isn't just one of the most extreme cases of Munchausen by proxy ever documented. It's one of the most disturbing betrayals of motherhood we've ever seen. Being a mother is supposed to mean protection, nurture, and unconditional love. And society holds that role sacred for a reason. We're taught that it is the safest place a child can be. So when harm comes from that space, from a person whose job it is to nurture, it cuts deeper. Mary Beth Tinning didn't harm strangers. She allegedly hurt the people who trusted her the most, her babies, again and 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 again, 9 times. In the world of true crime, few taboos cut deeper than a mother harming her own children. And that's what makes this story so hard to look at directly, because it forces us to ask what happens when the person who's supposed to be protecting you is the person you need protecting from. Thank you so much for listening and allowing me the space to tell these difficult stories. I appreciate it so much. If this story resonated with you, please like the video, and if you like spoken true crime stories, consider subscribing to the channel. I fully believe that sharing stories like these isn't easy, but it matters, and every conversation like this chips away at the silence. So thanks again, stay safe and stay curious, and I'll see you next time.